Okay, we will get started here in just a few minutes. This is the May 29th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started in a few minutes here. We're going to let some people get logged in. If for those who haven't attended a Hangout before, how basically works is we will have people that have sent questions in advance, and we can do that at clubcubase at steinberg.de. Or you could have questions in the comments field. If you're watching this live, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. If you're watching the replay of this after the live, you don't have to introduce yourself. You're more than welcome to. My name is Greg Ondo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a Steinberg product specialist, as a senior support technical specialist, I think something like that. And I have worked for Steinberg almost over 28 years now. So I'm broadcasting from outside Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. I'll apologize in advance because there's a new home that's finishing up and they've been drilling outside my office window today. So we may hear some noise. It seems like maybe it's settled down a little bit. Also, my wife is working directly above me. So you may hear her walking on a floor above me, and my son is home. So we'll probably get interrupted, so I could put a new Disney film on for him halfway through the Hangouts. So I'll apologize in advance for that. When we do the Hangouts, we'll probably have all the topics indexed tonight. So if you wanted to just review and jump back to different sections, we should have that in the index done later tonight. And if you ask your question, you could just enter it in the comments field. We'll try to go through them chronologically. If you have a question, it doesn't help if you just repeat the same question over and over again. So if we could try to steer away from that, I'm seeing people already kind of mentioning that. So it's not so bad before the Hangout starts, but after the Hangout, sometimes we'll have someone ask the same question 30 or 40 times and just kind of really clogs up the whole chat field, and it's hard to kind of wade through to find questions. So we'll try to get to the questions. It will be behind when you ask them live. We'll try to answer each question as completely and succinctly as possible. So we'll try to get through a lot of different questions. So please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll see where people from. We're seeing questions already coming in, and we'll let people get logged in. We usually start at about 8 to 10 minutes after the hour. So we'll let people get logged in. If we see the attendees kind of get settled in, then we'll go ahead and get started. But feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. And also, if you have questions, go ahead and enter them into the comments field, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Okay. All right, so we have Pin Dan. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, from Yorkshire, England. It's been on a lot of the Hangouts. All right, so we see Ace with a question on a sampler track. We'll go through that. Okay. I say comment, Greg will turn green like the Hulk, and for repeated questions. I don't think I'll try not to turn into the Incredible Hulk, but it just makes it a lot easier. All right, so we see Sir Robert Robinson. He's celebrating his birthday this weekend. All right, congratulations, Robert. Known Robert for a long time Club Cubase attendee at the Atlanta group, and also has attended many of the Hangouts here. Okay. All right, so we have Kuala Lumpur, Atlanta, Yorkshire, England. All right, so we have Ambient Dave checking in from the UK. Okay. And sometimes, inevitably, my timeline will run out of comments because I get behind. So it may jump a few times during the hangout, so I may have to reorient myself to try not to miss questions. Okay, so we have Stockholm, Sweden. All right, so we had good to see Dave again. So I'm just seeing a comment. The big question: has Greg run out of Disney movies to keep his son occupied during a hangout? It seems like I'm waiting for June to introduce some new ones. So, but yeah, he's been very Disney-fied during the pandemic here during hangouts. So it keeps his attention. So, all right. So you see Taylor from Pine Grove. Okay. So seeing Taylor with a question on control room. We have Kenosha, Wisconsin. Been there many times. Denver. All right, so Millard from Pennsylvania. He's been on a lot of the hangouts. We have New Orleans, Ottawa. Okay, so we have Toronto. All right, so Sweden, Amsterdam, Finland. All right, so Paul from Nashville. Good to see you on the hangout, Paul. Attended a lot of our Club Cubase Nashville meetings. All right, so we have Hamburg, Germany, where Steinberg is based out of. Welcome. Rhode Island, Austin, Texas. Okay, so seeing a question about the automation of MIDI controllers. I think you sent that in advance. Thanks. And you could always send questions in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. All right, James wishing happy Friday. That's good. We have New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Just see a question. Any tips on printing in Cubase? Is that printing scores or printing stems or printing audio files? That'd be helpful to know. Maybe if you could ask again. All right, so we have Turkey. All right, so Sweden, India, Finland, Tehran, Austria. Okay, we'll check the time. Okay, maybe another 30 seconds and we'll get going. I'll just want to make sure that we have audio coming through. Okay. All right, so we have South Jersey, UK, Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me just resize my browser here. Okay, so I think maybe some of the questions may have disappeared. Let me just hang on. Let me just see if I could switch to live chat here. Okay. So question, is there a way to, and let me just see if this is, just going to go to a different chat feed. Sorry about that. Okay, question. How to use sampler in Cubase 10.5 to map out sampler sound across the whole keyboard without the sampling speeding up so I could play chords or melodies? And where do I save the patch that I create? So once you have your sampler track here, so let me just, let's say I just kind of dragged a vocal file in, and we may just see, so if I have, so if you wanted to take any audio file, you could, at this point, just come over here. You could find different audio files, and if you wanted to right click, you could just say either insert into project or create sampler track. So I just took a vocal file here and wanted to turn it into the sampler track. Now, often when we do this by default, if I play one note and I play a lower note, those notes would be longer based on the sample itself. So if I wanted to make these all the same so that when I do play a chord, such as like a G major chord here, so that they'll all be the same, all you have to do now is just, you will see this little audio warp mode, and then you could just put it in enable audio warp, and then you could put it into music or solo mode. And now I could play just a chord, and all of them would be the same length. So once that is disabled, they're all going to play back different lengths based on the pitch. But once you enable the audio warp, that will automatically kind of make them all the same length regardless of where you play them on a keyboard. So that, I think, should do it. And then so you could do it just like that, and then once you're done, you know, it's going to be just stored. I think you could like with the sampler track, that you could just store it, store a preset. So let me just see if it's a right click thing. But you also will just see it directly inside of, I think if we just save a track preset, that will do it. But if you go to the pool window under the media, we could just see, when I come to my pool window, you'll see kind of a separate one for a separate area here for the sampler track as well. So to have it play back all kind of at the same rate, just make sure that you enable audio warp. And so it's a bit hidden. So once you kind of click in this area, then you'll notice that those functions will become available. Okay, so it says, hello, everyone. Hi, Greg. Question, can you cover what some of the latest updates are for Cubase 10.52 and what they do? Okay, so I'll just kind of go off a list here from the website. So there's some new range editing functionality. So when we want to come here, we could just say a common range edit function that is often used in like post-production. So if I have my range selection tool here, there's some new functions. So if we go to edit, we could say, let's go to our range. And here I will have, if I choose to cut head or cut tail under range. So if I choose to cut head, it'll automatically erase that part until the beginning of my range selection. And if I say from this point cut tail, I could just go to my range and say cut tail, and everything from that point onward will be deleted. So those are handy tools. You used to have to kind of make macros to do that. There's additional functions when you go into the key commands. So, and if we look under, I think it's going to be maybe under range editing, or maybe just to edit. And then there's going to be some additional range functionality here for like selecting, range to the next event or range to the previous event that you could access via just different keyboard shortcuts. So you may not see it necessarily directly in here, but you could just kind of have access to those from your different keyboard shortcuts. There's going to be a plugin report. So if you wanted to figure out exactly, once you go into your VST plugin manager, you can now have it generate a plugin report. So when we go here, you could actually kind of see, your product version, how many plugins you have to build, your OS. So kind of more of a diagnostic report, which could be helpful for figuring out like where your VST2 plugin paths are. So this could help for different diagnostic and support purposes. If you find that the program crashes because of a plugin, there's some new behavior where it will automatically go into the safe start mode. Like if you hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift when starting Cubase, so that you could disable different plugins that could be causing issues. There's some new colorizing functions. So when we want it to go to your preferences, we can, so if we go to the user interface, and let's say if we have our tracks and mix console channels selected here, and we look at my mixer, so we could, we've had the different ways of having our different colors here. But now when a track is selected, let's say these are all the same color, like these two tracks, but when it is selected, we can see in the mixer that this becomes more obvious. So the color becomes more kind of true to the original. So you could differentiate what is the selected track versus not. So there will also be different levels of event opacity. So if you wanted to come here to the preferences, and this is a feature that was kind of taken away in the previous version that they didn't think a lot of people were using, but they soon got figured out that people were in fact using those different things. So I think when we go to event display, that you could kind of have so I'll adjust the event opacity. So now we could have these parts that are basically just empty, where we see, just the event itself, so that we don't have to see the color behind it. So this is helpful sometimes for editing to the grid. So you could see kind of the grid lines directly underneath through the event. So I remember Michael Wagner, who's kind of a big hard rock producer, has worked with every huge 80s band and kind of defined a whole genre of music. He was one of the people who was a little upset. So if that is coming back, to make customers like Michael happy. So if you wanted to just have the color in the background, or If you wanted to have that be completely transparent, we could just kind of click there. And as you kind of look at the different parts, you could see that, you'll just have that transparent. So some people prefer that for different types of editing, especially with a grid. I find it really helpful. So you could select different grid types. So when you go to your key commands, so sometimes this is helpful when creating different macros where you may have to switch the grid type to, quantize versus bar or beat or adapt to zoom to make your macro work in particular functions. So you're able to set a particular grid type via a key command so that it makes macro creation a bit easier. We would have people sometimes when they would go into edit mode in previous versions, that is a common question where we say use video follows edit mode, that when you would play that the cursor would be minimized. So now we see kind of the full cursor, so it's a bit more obvious where your playhead position is located at. If we have multiple buses for inputs or outputs, we can come over here. So let's say if I added, let's say I add, let's say 16 mono ins, 17, why not? And before you'd have to kind of select each one of these independently and then remove it. So now if I wanted to look at this, I could just click on remove selected buses, and we could still do that kind of one by one. Within the direct offline processing, you could have default values for different plugins or different processes. So if you come here, you could have just a default function. So let me just select something. So I'll just say proceed and keep. So you could set kind of, very default functions so that you know what you could have, like a particular de-esser at, if you're working with only female voices versus male voices where you may have different frequencies. You could set those kind of default functions there. So the level meters used to be kind of just global for different meter preferences set up. So there's a few additional meters. So when you go to our meter settings here, we'll see that you can now have plus 3 dB, plus 6 dB, or plus 12 dB on digital scale. And as we wanted to switch between different metering types, there's new preferences so that when we go to our metering display, or metering appearance, that for each one of these different settings, you could have kind of, I believe this will allow you to have different color schemes for each different meter options as opposed to just a global color scheme. So if you switch different meters, you could have different metering appearances per meter type. So a couple of things. One of the preferences, and this could sometimes throw people when you go to VST plugins, is the suspend VST3 plugin processing when no signals are present. So by default, this used to be, I believe, enabled. Now it's going to be disabled. I think sometimes some people would be doing a project and the chorus comes in a lot of tracks and their CPU load would kind of go up. So that's kind of the default state has changed with that. Also just some improvements with like MIDI clock synchronization, and a number of different bug fixes as well. So you kind of get all that, as a free maintenance update. So it's a lot of great new features with that. So we'll go ahead and jump back to our feed quickly. Okay. Okay, just going through different questions here and comments. Okay, so we have a question. Will the new update change any pre-existing settings I may already have? I think the only one that would change by default is going to be the suspend VST3, but all your presets, all your configurations, all that will work. So, you know, nothing else should change. So, okay, so let's move on. Some different questions. Okay, in Cubase 10.5, I have Kontakt 5, but sometimes it crashes. Is there a trick or tips on how to get Kontakt to work? A lot of times, you know, if I would check, and I don't have Kontakt, I'm not a big Kontakt user, but a lot of times you may run into different scenarios, like if you have Hallian set up here. Yeah, you may want to, you know, depending on how much RAM you have in your system, you may want to actually get to the point where you could adjust how much is preloaded into your computer's memory versus, you know, versus a stream from disk. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you know, if you have, like, you know, we could have Hallian here where we could see multiple, you know, you could have up to 64 different instruments, and that could sometimes the processing loads will be split like per plugin instance. So if you have 32 different sounds in your sampler or your multi-temporal VST instrument, at that point you could be overloading one processor as opposed to having multiple instances with fewer samples in it. That could spread out the CPU core. But I think if you do those things, that should be able to optimize, especially if you don't have a ton of RAM or maybe an older computer. All right. Okay. Just going through. Okay, so it says when I route a reference track through the QSends, is there a way to monitor it through the loudness meter? So let's go ahead and let me just import an audio file here. I'll just do a new project or open another one. Let me just see if I have one. It's just a quick stereo. Okay, I'll just open it. Bear with me. Sorry about this. Okay, so if we want to set this up kind of as a reference track, I will come over to my VST connections quickly. I will go to my control room, and I think I have just a reference bus. So I'm going to take this and I'll set this to output to no bus. And in my QSends, I will just send this to QSend 3. And let's see if so I'm playing this back. So right now we have this, and I'll switch to my QSends. Let's see what, I'll just send it to QSend 1 here, sorry. So it doesn't look like that's going to get routed through the control room for metering. But one of the things that you could do, Taylor, is if you select it, go to your audio menu and then go to statistics. It'll do a quick analysis of your file. And this will give you kind of all the information on the metering and the levels for the files. So when you kind of come here, this will kind of give you a baseline of, and you could see what it is for your loudness units or dBs, what your RMS, your average RMS, your maximum, all those. So while you may not see it directly in the real-time metering, you could still get that data from the statistics. So when we come right over there again, so go to your audio menu to statistics, and that should give you a sense. You could always, route it through the main bus and look at the metering there. But that could throw you off if you have, a processing on different on your master fader. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so a question, how do I change my BPM to the correct tempo without the sound of the audio stems pitch shifting? The stems are 105 BPM, but my project is 130 BPM. The only time that your audio is really going to change is to change pitch, is if you have it, make sure that you don't have it in tape machine algorithm mode here. So when you go to Elastic, set it to time or pitch. But if you have it to tape, that will change the pitch as the tempo changes. So if let's say this is a piece that has varying tempo and isn't aligned to the file or isn't aligned to the metronome. So if I play this, metronome's completely out of whack and no correlation with that. So what I could do is select this, and in this case, if it has varying tempos where it's constantly speeding up and slowing down, like most live performances of real musicians kind of playing with, without a reference to the click track, I could go to my project menu, and then I could just choose tempo detection, and I'll say analyze. And as we listen to this, so we've done kind of a tempo analysis of the file. I'm going to define kind of where my downbeat is. So I'll just grab my pencil tool and drop that in. So if we have varying tempos on our project, I could now embed the tempo changes, all these tempo changes of every single beat into the project by going to my audio to advanced, and I'll say set definition from tempo. And we could write that into the audio file or just store it in the project. So now if I change this, the only time it's going to change, and let's say I want it to be a perfect 120 beats a minute. So if we go back to the original tempo, but then if I have this set to tape, now if I slow down the tempo to 120, it's going to vary the pitch. Like we're slowing down an analog tape machine. So if I wanted to take like a whole section here and kind of ramp up or down, we could have kind of like a vary speed function. But if I had the algorithm for this particular file set to time, if I do that, the pitch won't change, just the timing will. So make sure that you don't have the audio file in when you check the algorithms, that it's not in a tape. And then I think you should be able to change it from 105 to 130 without any problems. Okay, Greg, when in generic editor, when using a plugin, how can I type in the values? It lets me type, but just can't type in 50 plus, and it goes to 50. So let's say if I wanted to go to a generic editor, so let's say I'll just do a fairly simple plugin. Let's just do a compressor plugin. So let's say if my value here is minus 60 to 0, let's just come here to our generic editor view. So our makeup gain, it kind of seems like it's matching the same parameters. So let's say if I want this to be minus 32. So whatever parameter I kind of type in here, so let's say I want it to be 16, that these parameters for the generic remote, and I'm not sure if you're meaning from the generic remote editor, but it sounds like generic editor when using a plugin. So it seems like these are all kind of reporting the same values as what was in the plugin. Maybe if you could share what plugin you were using, that could be helpful as well. Okay. I see a question, has the bird returned to flying into my window, Greg? He's visited a couple different times, so I think it's the same bird. Okay. Okay, let's go through some of the questions that were sent in. It says, hi, Greg. Back in my hardware sampler days, I found it super helpful for realistic orchestral phrasings to link mod wheel to both volume and ladder filter simultaneously. Can sampler track do the same? So you can, you could control. So let's jump back to one of our other projects where we had sampler track. And we'll activate this project here. So let's say if I come here to my sampler track, I could, just add this. So let's say if I wanted this to, to my modulation wheel for volume, you could assign that via kind of a quick control. So if I just wanted to, we just, all right, so we have this to level. So at that point, you could just assign it to a quick control and do that. But when you say filter and ladder filter, so, you could assign, you may have to set these to two different controls. You have a lot more kind of flexibility with, different MIDI controllers, but you could use two different MIDI controllers for this, like, if you have two faders on your control, and just assign those via quick controls, and you have a lot more flexibility in the full featured sampler like Hallian. But you could definitely just kind of right click here, and if you're doing orchestral samples, Hallian, or, playing it back through Hallian Sonic may be a better tool, because the sampler track is really kind of designed for one sample and kind of a more creative function. So that way, if you're doing a lot of orchestral stuff, you could do it, but you could definitely take like a string sample and, move your mod wheel to change different parameters. Okay. Let me just see if I have a web browser open here in the background that I can close. See if I get some of these messages stop beeping here. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, is there a way to pre-automate MIDI continuous controller data in a way that when I play a note on a MIDI keyboard, CC changes over time according to what it defines? Sorry, I'm just going to shut off one thing so I get all my... So if we wanted to do something like that, so let's say, and we could do this through setting up kind of like LFOs. So let me just jump to this project here. So let's say if I have kind of a retro log sound here, and I wanted to, so it says pre-automate MIDI continuous controller data in a way that when I play a note on a MIDI keyboard, CC changes over time according to what is defined. So let's say if I have just a, and let me make sure I have my control room set up so we could hear. Okay, so I'm going to, let's say, just have a filter open up. So I will go to my instrument here, and let's say I want the cutoff to. I wanted that to automatically go as I'm playing. So, you could do this through like the LFOs often within the plugins, but if your plugin doesn't have an LFO, we could just kind of right click and we could choose to learn a CC. So I'm going to say, learn a CC. I'll set this to respond to controller 16, let's say. So I'm going to right click, learn CC, and then I'm going to move this knob from on my MIDI inserts. I'm just going to load up a MIDI control plugin. And now as I do that, we can see as I adjust this. So we've assigned CC16 directly to this particular parameter in the instrument. So if I go to my auto LFO plugin, I could just tell it to start with MIDI controller 16, and we could say I want it to be for half notes, quarter notes, and we could set kind of the range so that now when I play, and let's say if I want this to be half notes instead, I could just come here. And as we do that, I could say I want it to sweep like at the very top or in the middle. Or I want it to be a kind of a big range. I want it to go down. So you could assign, multiple LFOs or using the auto LFO plugin to kind of change so that your MIDI CCs can automatically be kind of, generating stuff and be tempo synced. So that way you could do, like, as you mentioned, custom swell pattern for strings without having to draw in the CC. So if you want your strings to automatically just, while you're playing let's say you want it to be a whole note. So like for every measure, you want it to go. So you could kind of right click on the parameter. If your instrument will do that, you could just kind of learn the CC. You could use a MIDI controller to spit that out if you don't have a controller with MIDI knobs on it, and set the auto LFO to transmit that MIDI controller message, kind of the range that you want that message to be spread. So if you want that to only go kind of down, and set your rhythmic value and kind of the shape of the waveform, or if you want it to be random. So you could do all sorts of fun stuff like that for coming up with creative results. Okay, so we'll move on. Question also, does Cubase have any useful analysis reference tools when comparing other reference songs, for example, stereo imaging? So I think a lot of times, let's see if we just select something as the reference. So looking at the statistics, a lot of times imaging isn't, something that's like that could be measured so much. So that may have to be kind of done by your ear. But, here you could, see, different settings with the analysis. So, but, for imaging and different mixes, sometimes you could use like a phase scope. So if you wanted to put that into just as a reference, we could just say, okay, I want to go to my inserts. And let's say on my monitors. And I think if you go to tools, you could go to like a multi-scope. So here you could just say, I want to see this as an oscilloscope. So let's say I want to see the stereo channel. I want to see my frequency, or kind of like your phase scope. So that's an analysis tool that you could use for imaging if you needed to. So, and you could just have that, on your master bus, or put it directly inside of your control room as an insert just on your monitors, so it's not affecting anything with your sound or latency with that. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I'm at the any tips for printing in Cubase. So hopefully there will be, more details on what type of printing. Okay. Okay, question. Is there a way to sustain a note or chord that I just played on a MIDI keyboard until I play a different pitch without sustain pedal, maybe a MIDI insert or modifier? I don't know of one. I mean, generally MIDI works on, setting a note off and a note, note on and a note off message. So some instruments can do that, where it'll just automatically play until the next, can hold until the next note comes in. But I'm trying to, but I don't know of a way of doing that. I think it's going to be more on the actual instrument itself and how that responds, because it could be a bit, counter to the MIDI protocol. So, but I think, different instruments may allow you to set that up. Okay, so it says, hello, how to set up orchestral template using Halion Symphonic Orchestra for writing quick scoring. So, just setting up a template, and I'll show you one. I think I have a project maybe that a friend of mine, Carlos Chafin, has done. So let me just see if I have it. And this is his kind of quick, dirty Halion Symphonic Orchestra template that he uses for a lot of stuff. So I think this is for kind of a ballet. So yeah, it's just kind of violins, a couple violins, probably short and long notes, 2 violas, cello, double bass, his winds. Some percussion, his brass instruments where needed, percussion. So that's kind of how, like, if I so if we wanted to kind of just kind of over here, probably like maybe a slower, you know, so of different violin variations going through, let's say, shorter notes. And we get a violas, probably a long and a short. It's a cello and bass. So that's not, you know, for a quick, and this is all, I believe, let's take a quick look. I think this is all basically in high-end symphonic orchestra as well. So if we wanted to just come over here, and as we would select different instruments, so this is all, and you could have your different articulation switching, but that's kind of a pretty good, you know, high-end symphonic orchestra template that, you know, my friend Carlos shared with me. But a lot of people will have, you know, all their winds in a folder, all their strings in a folder, percussion in a folder, brass in a folder, and then subfolders of, you know, different French horns, different, you know, so depending how extensive you want to get, you could go from, you know, 16 tracks to, you know, I've seen some people with 3,200 tracks. So that's not uncommon for people doing huge projects. Okay, so we'll move on. Hope that made sense. Okay. Okay, so we see a question. I record 3 MIDI lanes using cycle new parts stacked mode, and when I bounce the MIDI, if I select only one part, the complete lane with the comp tool, the bounce MIDI button is inactive. It's only active if I select multiple parts. In the comp tool, if I select one complete lane, only then, only way I could do it is deleting the others manually. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's say on a violin part here, I'll just turn my snap on here quickly. Okay, so let's say I'll switch to I'll check my MIDI record mode here. So I'm not sure if you have this set to on your MIDI record mode, like if you have it set to merge, but it sounds like maybe you have it set to new parts. So I will come here and let me just Okay, so let's say I did a couple passes here. All right. So say in stack mode, how can I bounce the MIDI if I select only one part? So let's just say, okay, I'm just going to reread this. So it says, it's only active, select multiple parts with the comp tool. If I select one complete lane, only then. So try, if this is kind of maybe, I think this might be what you're trying to do, is maybe to have that. So say I have all three parts now, and it's kind of in stacked mode. So when I come here, so let's say if I go to the bottom center and if I only wanted to hear like the second pass, and let me just see if I just click in the bottom center, if that's all we hear. Let's go to the last one. So just kind of selecting your different takes here. So I'm not sure if you have to, you know, if you need to bounce the MIDI, or just by clicking in the bottom center and selecting kind of your different performances. So let me know if that works, if that makes sense, and if that kind of solves what you want to do. All right, so we'll move on. Okay, so just see question. Maybe this is, I can't seem to access some of my VST sounds, though registered on my e-licenser. If I'm not sure if they're like loops or VST instruments. So sometimes you may want to just look, some of your sounds, and I just kind of got in the Facebook discussion helping someone. Some of the older instruments had, like the Halion Symphonic Orchestra was a separate instrument, but now it will show up as an available option here within HSO, within like a playing engine such as the Halion Sonic SE or Halion. So that's pretty typical. If it's different loops that you have active, so let's say if we come here to our different loop libraries, and let's say if you purchase some and you don't see them, sometimes coming up here to your media bay and just refreshing and go into your VST sound and say, okay, I just want these sounds, and just hit rescan disk, and that will go through and kind of rescan all of your discs. I know sometimes there was a recent and this happened to me as well, and it was a recent like plug-in, like a loop set collection, and I think Millard Brown, who's on a Hangout, ran into this as well, and they weren't showing up in the different categories here on the right hand side media bay. But some of those, and if you go into your preference folder, you may just have to delete two files. I think one was mediabay.db and one was and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was one of the mediabay files. And if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could just send you the exact two files to remove and then refresh, and then I think all of your plugin, if you have different loop sets that aren't showing up in the right hand side, but if you could maybe specify that. All right. So question, when it comes to recording, is there any difference in the pure audio signal coming into any given DAW? Technically, no, but if you are recording, if you're recording the same signal, different DAWs can handle different things. So if we go to your project setup, one of the things that's unique about Cubase is like with the URC interfaces, or the AXR4T or AXR42 or 4U rather, you could actually record as 32-bit integer. So most DAWs don't allow you to capture 32-bit integer. It's like not even natively available on Core Audio for Mac, for instance. So we actually had to write a special driver. So depending on your hardware, sometimes the software may not take full advantage of it. 95% of the time, I would say no. But if you have a computer, if you have a 32-bit integer converter and your program can't do it, it will sound a little different. So technically, it's not that Cubase is adding anything special, but it will capture higher resolution audio. Now, when you get into the mix engine, that's when it could vary pretty significantly. Okay. Okay, so MIDI sections, your best tricks to compare two MIDI section to find difference. Is it enough to let me know difference between tone, length, and velocity? Okay, so let's say if I have two different MIDI tracks to see if they're different. So let's say if I come here and I duplicate this particular track. Okay, so I'm just going to read. So it says best tricks to compare two different MIDI sections to find difference. Is it enough to let me know difference between for tone, length, and velocity? So if you kind of look at, let's say, if we're looking at something in our MIDI editor here, velocity can make a huge difference depending on the instrument, especially like different drums. So let's say if we play this particular section back. So let's say if I just come here and depending on velocity, let's see if we hear a difference. We should. So, just kind of after a while, I think that you can kind of get a sense, and it could really depend on how you drive the instrument. So probably if I come here to this instrument, and let's look at this one particular instrument here. So, different things can drive different instruments to behave, differently. So sometimes it may be just like a velocity or modulation wheel to go between. So let's say if I have violins 2 here. You just see what channel this is in. So I'll go to my bass part here. Okay, so let's say this violin part here. You know, you could have different expression controllers. So having your, depending on the patch itself, you could have like modulation can make a big difference. So, you know, check out your velocities, and after a while, you get a sense of like, you know, what velocities will be, how it'll respond to different instruments. And it could really be really, you know, significantly different depending on how the instrument is designed to do that. So, okay, so a question, is there a way to view the pictures for each track larger? I'd like to store settings with pictures, but the window to view the picture, even after I click the view, is super small. Yeah, it is pretty small. You know, currently when you look at pictures, I've kind of been lobbying to make the picture window a little bigger. You know, I think if you make the tracks bigger, you know, you could do that. But, you know, I would like to see maybe like, especially with user presets or user pictures, that you could just make it bigger so you can take a picture of like a guitar amp and see it in great detail. So I think it's kind of stuck on kind of a smaller size currently, but I'll mention that again and reiterate it. All right, so we have someone from Barbados via Brooklyn, New York. So Barbados is a beautiful island. I got to vacation there about 7 years ago. Okay. Okay, so a question, how to set up mixing and mastering, and it's really, you know, it's a tough question to deal with just because every track could be, you know, present different things. So stuff that I show you could be not applicable at all to your particular track for both mixing and mastering. So, you know, if you wanted to do, and it's a common question I get, you know, it's like almost saying, you know, what color do I need to paint my picture to make it sell more? You know, is red better than yellow? You know, it really depends on what you're actually doing. So some things that you could do for mixing tips, you know, is we could, you know, come over here, you know, something that's really helpful is understanding kind of the quick link. So if I wanted to take all these channels up simultaneously without having to assign them to different groups, you could do that. So if I wanted to take all these different drum tracks louder, softer, and kind of keep the proportional volume, a lot of people may, you know, as they're approaching different things, make sure that the kicks and the bass are kind of congruent and make sense. Now let's say if I wanted to, it's common to, if you have two guitar tracks, to pan them, you know, so if you're going to come here, instead of having them panned straight in the center, you can make it sound wider. And if you wanted to do just some like, you know, quick dirty mastering, people will put, you know, EQ on the master bus. Some people may also just put like a limiter or maximizer here. So if you bypass that, so that's mastering to a lot of people. You could also put in tape saturation if it makes sense. So, but every single song is going to present different challenges. So, you know, and if you have a formula for that you do everything on, then, you know, you're probably cheating your songs a little bit. So, Okay, so let's move on. Okay. So question, is it possible to have more than one control room set up when using different audio interfaces? So once you have, if you have different audio interfaces that you're switching back and forth between, if you go to your audio connections window, what I would do is just, and you click on a control room tab, is you could store different presets. So I'll just call this, Hangout. And then if I wanted to go to a different audio interface, I would just simply load up, I would store it as a preset configuration here, where your different elements and your setup will be different, maybe for different IO options that you may have in your system. So try just saving within the audio connections window under Studio. Try to go to your control room and just save the actual, save the actual presets for different interfaces. So. Okay, so let's see what Turkey, Portugal. All right. All right, does Cubase have UI scaling? A lot of it depends on different parts of the program. So if I wanted to come here, you could see kind of the user interface scale depending on different aspects. So, but a lot of times you may run into third-party plugins that don't scale or don't work well with high DPI. So, okay. All right, hang on a second. My son's knocking on the door. His movie may be over. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. All right, so let's move on. So I see a question in control room. Is there a benefit to using dim rather than reference button and setting lower volume? It will kind of get you to the same it could get you to the same point if that's how you want to set your. Let me just get this. So, your known reference level you can have set. So, I know a lot of people use this as like the loudest that they want to mix at. So when you go here to use reference level and you hold down the Alt or Option key. So as soon as you click here, because after a while, sometimes it's really tempting to just keep getting louder and louder as you're mixing longer and longer. So I know a lot of people that before they even start on a mix will have a known monitoring reference level, and that's what they use the reference level for. And the dim could, just, knock down. So say if we're here, and for our monitoring, if we just wanted to dim, we could set different amounts for a quick difference. So I tend to use my reference for my known. This is as loud as I'm going to allow myself to monitor before I realize I'm lying to myself, and dim to dim. So I kind of use them for opposite functions, but you could set your reference level down lower, but you could take advantage of having both of those functions there. I think makes sense. Okay. I just see a comment. So if you've learned something new, please feel free to, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe to the channel so as things are new, you could, get notified of different hangouts and other videos. So thanks for the reminder, Taylor. Okay. So question, how is Cubase running on your MacBook? I am undecided between PC, desk, or a new MacBook Pro. I work with normal rock songs, but I would love to explore film scoring. Cheers in advance. I have a MacBook Pro because I could run both Mac and PC, and it's my work computer that Yamaha provides for me, and they're very generous with that. So I could kind of have one computer that can go back and forth between both platforms. So half the time I'm running Windows on my MacBook. If you want to get into film scoring, I think if you wanted to advance to have more solid state drives, if you need more memory, you need stuff like that, like the desktop PC may be a better choice because it gives you a lot more expansion capabilities than what you'd get in a MacBook Pro. I think you could max out at 32 gigs of RAM, and I know a lot of film composers don't even do anything below 128 gigs of RAM for their setups. And also for a lot of film composers, they like the ability, if a part goes bad, that they could go to a store or, can actually go somewhere and get a new power supply or a new part for their computer and kind of modify it a bit easier than you can with Macs. So it's really a personal preference. Okay. Okay, just going in. All right, so we have people from Israel checking in. All right. All right. We already had people where it's Saturday. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to A/B in channel strip plugins? Let's take a look and see if we could do that. So if you kind of just, let's say if we set up, excuse me, I'm moving the microphone out of the stand. So it looks like if we come here, let's say if we set up our compressor here, so we have that. going on. That we could say copy A to B, and let's adjust this and switch to B. So it looks like you could just kind of right click in the window here. So let's say have this setting, and I would say now I switch to B setting. I move this, and let's adjust kind of the frequency spectrum here. And then just kind of right click and switch to A, switch to B. So it looks like you could do your A to B switching on the channel strip plugins as well. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. If I open a VST instrument but then change to monitor a different track, how do I find out which track had the original VST if I can't remember? Okay, so if I open a VST instrument but then change to monitor a different track, how do I find? Okay, so let's say I have this and I go to my VST instrument. All right, so let's say we have this open. So I just kind of opened up the VST instrument here. And it's kind of by default labels it. And if I think I do it the same, if I add an instrument rack or an instrument track. So let's add a retro log here. Okay, so let's say if I'm on a completely different track, the one thing you could do is, you could try just searching here. You'll see a find tracks. So you could just type in like, I was looking for Padshop, and then that should take you right there. So I think it's just Command F directly there, and then you could just type in retro, and then that will select the particular instrument. So I think that should work for you. So try the search function, and then just kind of type in whatever instrument that you opened, and whether you open it as a VST instrument track or an instrument rack to a MIDI, you should be able to just do the search function and type in the instrument, and it will take you directly there. Okay, just kind of going through. My chat is jumping around again. Just give me a second. Okay, just navigating my chat here. Okay. Okay, so just going through. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, I have an MR816 CSX. How can I give a singer reverb? So I don't have a CSX hooked up to this computer. I still use one in my personal studio, so I have two of them. But you'll see kind of the audio with it, and it's kind of set up a bit differently with the newer interfaces. But what you want to do is to go to your audio connections and make sure that you have the input routed to your particular channel here. So let's say, okay, I wanted that to be set up. And at this point, you go into like your full mix console view, and you'll have in the input channels, make sure that you have like an audio hardware setup that you'll see here in your studio menu. And then there's different modes. So you want to make sure that that is not set in external effects mode, I believe is kind of what it was. So, but in that way, you'll see a hardware tab. Now, you may have to go to your racks and activate hardware tab. And then once you see the hardware tab, you'll see where you could access the morphing channel strip or access the reverb. And within the hardware rack setting, you could just turn the reverb on, and that reverb is coming directly from the MR816, so you don't hear any latency. On the new URC interfaces, which is what I have currently going on, let me just set up the output here. You need to make sure that the outputs are configured like so on your outputs. And then once you have an input defined, so I will go ahead and add an audio track, and I will set the input to come directly from the URC interface. And then on the newer interfaces, you could just come here and we could see that, you know, if I wanted to have the reverb amount, I could just kind of, you know, turn on the reverb. I could adjust the reverb settings, and you could adjust, you know, whether you wanted to have, you know, the morphing channel strip on the input, and you could choose whether this is monitored or printed through. And then you just will have, and this is kind of how it'll look in the hardware racks, and you have a send level for the reverb, so you could add less reverb or more reverb to the signal. So that's, you'll kind of do it through the full mix console view in the hardware tabs, but it would look kind of very similar to this, but just in kind of like a rack form. And that's how you could give a reverb. And it's powered directly from the MR816 CSX. So it's a great interface. I still love mine. Okay. Okay, question: how to track record your vocal audio while recording screen capture and not showing you recording, so you can move around Cubase freely. So I'm not sure what screen capture software you're using, so different ones will affect. So I generally would, how I do a lot of tutorials, if you know, when I'm doing like my normal tutorials, you know, I generally just kind of capture, you know, if I'm capturing audio, I may send it into, I kind of use it for like these Hangouts. I take my audio from my interface and a microphone and take that into a Yamaha mixer that has a USB output. And I use the USB output from the Yamaha mixer for the transmission. And I find that works really reliably. But, you know, sometimes there's a lot of this screen capture software has really horrible audio support. So that could, you know, take over the audio interface driver. And it's hard to say, you know, you don't indicate if you're on Mac or PC. But if you have the option to kind of run a dual setup, I think it makes a lot of sense where you have dual audio interfaces, one that's for the screen capture and maybe one that's for your Cubase. And I know there's some people set up like all sorts of very convoluted routing and different plugins. And, you know, it's still, for me, I've tried that and it's not very reliable for what I'm doing. But, you know, doing a tracking session and broadcasting it is, you know, that, you know, that's could, you know, it's not, I wouldn't recommend it for like a serious project, but if you're doing kind of a tutorial or sharing something, it could work. But, you know, a lot of times, you know, the audio interfacing into your screen capture is pretty poor. but try a dual setup if you have like an older audio interface laying around. Okay. Okay, so okay, so hey Greg, how do you import sound files in Cubase, convert them into the project sample rate, but keep in memory the original sample rate so that you can time stretch it without any artifacts? So if you wanted to import a file, I think if you just go to your preferences and under editing to audio, at this point you could choose to, there's different settings you could use. So if you always wanted it to convert to different project settings. So if you import a file, you could choose to, copy the files to the project folder. You could also have it convert automatically to different project settings. So, so if you do that, and let's say if you have a 96K file and your project's at 44.1, you drag it in. And this is one of those settings where you could also just have it open the options dialog box. So if you have it open the options dialog box and you choose to convert it to the project sample rate, or if you have this setting checked, your original 96K file is intact, but as it is imported into the project, it'll convert to sample rate so that because the project will need to have a common unified sample rate. But your original file is still intact. So if you needed to import that file, you could just simply take off that setting and then do kind of extreme time stretching or pitch shifting if you needed to for sound design, where the higher sample rate could benefit the quality of that process. So check under editing audio, and on import audio files, you could have it open the options dialog box every time you do that. And a lot of people, that's the default state, I believe. And a lot of people, as they do that, will just, click on don't show me this message again. And then this will go to use settings where you could have that defined. So under editing audio on import audio files, you'll see those settings. Okay, so just seeing questions. Can you give us the latest rundown or a rundown on the latest update? So we did that a little earlier. So. Okay, it says rearranging sends is a bit too complicated, unlike inserts where they can be drag and drop. Is there any technical reason why it's not implemented the same? So let's take a quick look at it. So I'll go ahead, just open this up. Let me adjust my connection settings again here. Okay, so let me just come here. I'll just add different effects to the send. So let's say I want a reverb, and let's say a delay. So one of the things that I would ask is, because these are actually kind of in sequential order of the processing. So there's probably, and as you're doing this is sending out to different parallel streams. So it's not actually processing these in any order. So I was just curious why you needed to switch the order of these. So that would be kind of my first question, because the signal flow order doesn't really make any difference. Now, one thing that you could set up as a preference, so let's come over here, and I think it might be under plugins, where you could choose to just see if it's maybe under VST. There's this preference. I think this is unchecked by default, where you could say connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. So if I have a new project, and let's just have 8 tracks here. Let me just filter my inputs. So now if I just wanted to, select these channels here, I could say, okay, I want to ascend on all of these. So I'll just add an effect send to, let's say, our mono delay. So now we've done that. We get to our effect send. That will be added on each one. And let's kind of do the same concept for a reverb on send 2. So we'll just add effects channel to the selected channels. And we'll make it reverb. Okay. So, once you have that done, and now as we add different channels, so let's say if I come here, let's add an audio channel or several, that those will automatically kind of be connected. So, the reason why you may not need to have these in particular order is because they're not in like a signal flow order. So, okay, so let's go ahead. So I'm not sure if it's just maybe like a visual cue of why you needed to do that. But, and then once you have, here, you could just say, I wanted to go to, your different effect sends. And let's say, okay, I just want to turn this off. But if you click here, you can say, I wanted these all to go to, or let's add quickly. I'll just add in our effects channel. We'll test something here quickly. So let's say a flanger. So let's say I have my flanger set up as my effects end, and if I select these tracks here and go to my sends, let's say I hold down my quick link, and let's say if I want these all to go to flanger, you could just kind of click here and say I want these all to go to mono delay for send 2 and send 3. I want these all to go to revelation. So you could just kind of click exactly where you want it to drop there as well. So if you wanted to just visually organize, so give those things a try, and I think that will help. Okay. Okay, question, can someone tell me if I should be able to load RX2 in the right side panel media browser? Cubase doesn't see RX2 there, but I can import audio RX2 files. What am I missing? So if you wanted like Rex2 files, I don't... so let's say if we come over here to your loops and browsers... So if you have your Rex2 files, you may be able to just access them. So it may not be able to filter by that, but if you go to your file browser, I don't have any Rex2 files, but I believe that you should be able to just kind of browse them and see them. Like if you could pick a folder here if you just go to your file browser, and then if you wanted to just right click and add favorites, that you should be able to store that as a favorite. So I think, but you may not be able to differentiate between Rex2 files and as a separate file type. Okay, question. How can insert a second output but in mono and have it be on all the time? I'd like to run a mono to my drums, but always switches my monitors off. Adding headphones in control room cannot be in mono. Okay, so second output. So if you go into your control room, and let me just say, let's come over here. All right, so I'm just, so a second output, but in mono and have it be on all the time. Okay, so it says I'd like to run a mono to my drums, but always switches my monitors off. Adding headphones in control room cannot be in mono. So have you tried, just out of curiosity? I'm not sure if why in a control room if you need a mono I'd like to run a mono to my drums. I don't understand that part, but if we go to your down mix presets, like if I have let's just jump back to my other project here. So let's say if I'm in this project, let me just jump over that one again. So I'm not sure if just having them in a down mix, the mono. So I'm not sure, like if we could have, one thing that you might do if you always wanted the mono on all the time is to just add an output here. So let's say if I'm in my mix console, is try to add if you go to the racks, is try to just add a direct routing. And then if you add a group, so let me just jump to another project where this will make more sense. So let's say if we want to do this, and I'll add a mono group. So let's add a group channel. I'll just add a group channel, period. And let's make it a mono group. So let's say as we're doing this, and if you want all your drums, I'll go here and let's get to your racks and make sure that direct routing is turned on. And then there's a little, if you click on this, you could actually have direct routing summing mode. You'd probably want that to be enabled. And in your direct routing, we could say, okay, I want to take all of my drums here. And let's route this to my mono group. And then we'll go ahead and turn it on. So at this point, you could send everything to your mono group that's constantly on, and it's still going to the stereo out. So, so see if that works, and maybe if you could explain, I'm probably just being dense, like why you would need to, you know, I don't understand. You'd like to run a mono to your drums. So, but I think if maybe you just kind of try that with the direct routing, because that will send it to the stereo out and to multiple groups simultaneously, and one of those groups could be mono. Okay. Okay, so we have a question, how to make generated harmonies for voice sound more natural and not like computer. Thank you. So there's a couple of little things you could do. Let's just open up in our project. See if I can find it. All right, I think this will work. So I'll figure out I'll generate the chords from this part here.
You stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why something's wrong. I can't go on.
So if you wanted to kind of play around with some of the different functions, so I could come here and let's just generate a couple harmony voices. So go to my audio menu and let's just do like 2 harmony voices. So once you're in the editor, one of the things that you can do, there's a couple of things you can do. So let's say if we're in this particular editor, is you'll have, and let me just blow this up a little bit and switch my colors here. Is you have a Formant control, and this is in version 10 and longer. So if we go to, we select show all smart controls, and then for each one, so you have a volume control in the lower right-hand corner, but you also have a Formant control that you could shift. So try adjusting and shifting the Formant control of each of the segments, and then you could have it sound a bit less robotic. So just kind of click, select this segment and go to the lower left-hand corner and shift the Formants. And then that should help it sound a little less mechanical. Okay. Okay, it says, in case questions get off, I'm going to repeat here as I had to leave. Sorry. Okay. Any useful reference tools when comparing other mixes in the plugin? Okay, so I think we went through that. All right, to save time, is there a similar batch function for multiple files like crossfade you apply for fade in and out in a shortcut? So if you just select, multiple, let's say, if I just kind of come here, let me just throw some different audio files in. So let's just say I'm finding quick, like snare, like individual samples. Okay, so let's say if you have a number of different audio files. All right, so I'll just read this. So, okay. So it's a batch function for multiple files like crossfade, where you need to apply a fade in and out in a shortcut. So let's say if I'm just here and I have all these files, you could just select all of them and hit X, and that will do kind of the crossfades between the different clips as you kind of zoom in and out. So, try just selecting if they're all kind of attached to each other. Just try hitting X, and that will do kind of a short crossfade between all the different sections. Okay. Okay, question. Why does Steinberg insist middle C is C3 rather than C4? It's not that Steinberg insists that, it's just different standards. So I believe like one of the whatever group does different standards, they based it on a piano keyboard being the full range of music parts, which is 88 notes, and then MIDI itself has 128 notes. So many other companies, Yamaha's one considers C3 as middle C. So it's because MIDI has more notes than what the previous standard was. So that's why. So it's kind of a nebulous area where the MIDI specification doesn't necessarily line up with the international spectrum or International Standards Society or whatever. So that's why. Okay, so let's go ahead. Question: is there anything that tells you which MIDI key you are playing? For example, C472 or chords as you play live. So if you wanted to, let's say if I have a MIDI track here. I think if we just kind of click on the status line. I think there is kind of like a chord scale here. Let me just see if I... So you could kind of see current chord display for different MIDI notes. So if you come here, let's just take this off step. So if you want to determine like what chords they're actually doing, if you go to a chord track or go to the chord pads, you could come here let's unassign a pad, and I'll just come here. And I think that we could just do like I know in the chord track, I'll just come here. And then you could just have MIDI input, so whatever you play will be just kind of mapped out for you chord-wise. So you could do that. And if you have a MIDI track, you could go to the MIDI monitor plugin. So if I select this, you could go to your MIDI inserts to MIDI monitor. And now as you play, it'll show you exactly what MIDI message is being transmitted. So I see a question. Hi, Greg. How can I route audio from my computer, such as YouTube, to record in Cubase? A lot of times it depends on your audio drivers. Some of them will allow you to go back and forth, and Mac can be a little more friendly with this. But in PC, you may have the capability of rerouting audio. Sometimes you may have depending on your audio interface, like if you have an RME interface or a Steinberg interface, you get like a little DSP mix effects, or like a mixer software where you could do internal routing. A lot of times the two they can often share. So you'll have settings often in the control panel for the audio interface. And within Cubase, so if you go to your VST audio system and select, you could say, you want to be you'll see like, release ASIO driver, release driver when application is in background. But a lot of times you may have to set like a different output and then and I've seen people physically patch the cables. I know some people use utilities like I think there's Voice Meter from Banana or something like that will allow you to internally route. But a lot of times it's just that depending on your operating system, that it's not really designed to route audio internally. So, but a lot of times you could just go to like a YouTube to MP3 website and just, extract the MP3 file directly into Cubase as well. So a lot of people do that. Okay, just moving on. Thanks for all the great questions. And again, if you've learned a new tip or trick, please feel free to ask a question or feel free to give a thumbs up, and also to make sure you subscribe to the channel if you've done that. Okay, so let's move onward. Okay. Okay, so Greg, on the sampler, what was the trick so sounds imported don't get speeded up funny sound? For example, if I want to sample a French horn or violin and I want to map it across the keyboard. So that was just going to be basically, as we kind of start with this, is just the warp. So let's say if I wanted to do this for... I think we could, there's like a little bass sample that comes in here. It's a little Motown bass. I'll just type in Motown. And then I could just drag this over. So as soon as I drag it over, it's going to automatically be playable across the sampler track. But as I go lower, the sample is going to slow down. So you'll see that these little parameters here, they're pretty well hidden, but just click on audio warp, and now and you could just kind of play the samples across the keyboard. But it will, without the audio warp, it will play the samples across the keyboard, but will slow down depending upon the pitch, how samplers normally work. So if you wanted that to be the same length regardless of what pitch, just enable the audio warp. Okay. 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 Okay, so it says, "Hi, Greg. How do I properly use the loudness meter?" It really depends on what you need to use it for. So a lot of times, if you're doing particular projects and depending on what the destination is, you may want to have different loudness meter settings. So broadcast will have different loudness standards than something for Spotify or Amazon or iTunes. So when we come here, let's go to our meters section. So if I was doing this for broadcast, we'd want to aim it around minus 23 loudness units. So you may want to adjust accordingly. But if I was doing this for something for Spotify, that's usually around minus 14 loudness units. So it helps to know kind of what you're delivering for, and a lot of different services, you know, and their standards will evolve over time. So it's pretty common for that to change and evolve. So, you know, just kind of know what you're looking for, but generally broadcast will be altered if it's over minus 23 or way under. So they'll try to bring it up, and that's kind of their ideal level. And a lot of streaming services for delivery will aim for minus 14. So, and you could go into the meter setup, and when you go into the settings, you could adjust what you want kind of your target levels to be. So it really depends on what you're delivering for. Okay, so let's just go ahead. Question: what is the more accurate way of processing with plugins, DOP or insert slots render? I discovered rather noticeable differences with the same change of plugins applied in DOP mode versus insert slots. It there could be variables, but either way is fine. So with DOP mode is it could be processing everything, you know, like it could be more, you know, how the chain is processed. So it could make a difference. And also when you're what you're actually rendering to, like, you know, if you're doing a render in place, if you're doing 32-bit floating point versus 24-bit fixed point, that could make a difference as well. So either way will work, but you can see what works best. But they should be pretty close. But, you know, depending on what the source is that you're doing in the DOP, it could make a difference as well. So. Okay, so hi Greg, could you explain the pre and post tails in the direct offline process box? So let me just think I may have a file that could do this pretty well. Okay, so let's just say I have
Some mossy wireless. Some mossy wireless.
all right, so let's say if I want to just take that process there, and let's say if I wanted to put a delay on it in through my offline processing. Okay, so now we listen to it.
Some more say wireless. Some more say
And let's say I'll just take this off. I'll take the loop off.
wireless. Some more say wireless.
So what we see here is, the tail in milliseconds. So how long the tail will kind of go on and how much longer that the process will be extended as well. And that's what those two functions allow you to do. So when you have reverbs or delays that are kind of cascading, that way they could just kind of extend naturally without being kind of abruptly cut off. Okay. Just reading through different comments. Question, is it possible to use my external sound interface for recording and monitoring and then internal one PC mic to talk back? Thank you. So generally you only want to run one audio interface, and the problem gets to be, there's all sorts of issues. The Mac can allow you to do different aggregate devices, but then you have like compounded latency. But one of the issues gets to be, it seems like a simple thing. I'll just, use my, my laptop mic for talkback. But to have those two audio streams going concurrently means that, Cubase is always going to have a way to know when to send, even though it's just a talkback. But generally, Cubase needs a way to kind of coalesce to make the clocks line up. And if there's no way that the built-in audio mic is going to, could be running at a different sample rate that you can't change. It could be, running at different times. And that's why you kind of want, ideally, to have a unified interface so that one interface can do all of your different talkback options. And that's why having like the ability to expand down the road with like ADAT input connections can make a big difference, and why a lot of audio interfaces have that. So ideally you'd want one. I know some people will do it through like an ASIO for all, and it just never works out because the two different audio clocks, which is really essential for, Cubase predictably processing and sending out audio and playing back, is going to be totally kind of thrown off once you introduce like, multiple clock sources. So ideally you'd want an audio interface that could handle all of your talkback and your different connections needed. So okay, so let's move on. Okay, just reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so just seeing in generic editor, how can I type in values? I think we did that already. Okay, so I see a question. Is there a RAM management formula for a template? You always want more RAM. But it really, every template's going to use different amounts of RAM depending on what samples are active, which tracks are disabled or enabled. So it could really vary, and depending on how many tracks that you have. So all those, so there's not really a formula other than you always want more RAM depending if you have a huge project. Okay, so we have a question. What is Rewire used for? Rewire was kind of an old system designed by Steinberg and propeller heads to allow you, to synchronize a program. So it started with Rebirth, which was a 808, 909, and two TB303s. So it was a software that propeller heads did way back when. And, those guys used to, write the manuals for Steinberg in a day. So old friends of the company. So we've, and that would allow you to have Rebirth play and to synchronize with directly with Cubase. And then it expanded to, take the audio out when they came out with Reason, to take the audio out to bus it directly back into Cubase so that you could run both programs. So Rewire allows you to kind of pass audio and synchronize two different devices. It's kind of fallen a bit out of favor because you always had to save a separate document. So you'd have to have like a Rewire slave, something like Reason or Rebirth, and you'd have to save that project and then save a separate Cubase project, and often those two could get disassociated from each other. So recently you've seen Reasons, I think Reason Studios or Reason Racks, whatever they call it now, where they're running as a VST plugin because the workflow makes a lot more sense. So Rewire was a protocol to synchronize between those two. Okay, between two different programs. So, so you see a question: is there any VST virtual bass and guitar in the future? It's actually in the present. So if you wanted to check out like some of the, I think. Could come over here. Let's see if we have. Thought I had this one, but you could check out the VST electric bass. Thought I had this as a file. Let me just see if I could find it. But this is a pretty amazing sample set. I will show you here. So this way we could come over here, and what's kind of cool about this is you could switch between different pickup configurations. So if you want more of a P bass sound or a Music Man bass, you could switch between like neck or a bridge pickup only. Just take it off the. And you could actually pick and choose different strings if you want to have your different slides, different playback positions. So if you say, I want this to be more. And you could also run it through different amplifier sections as well. So that's a really wonderful instrument and I'm a bass player, so I, like most people, you hate every instrument that's your own native instrument. And you could also check out, like, if you're looking for acoustic guitar, check out like the T guitar. So which you could just run inside of like Halion Sonic SE. So if I wanted to come here. And this is a pretty amazing acoustic guitar. So you could actually trigger different patterns. So I could play a chord and switch between different patterns if you wanted to. So all sorts of different options that you could have for here. So if you want different fingering style, so you could have, you know, kind of play individual notes here if you want to play chords. And then if you wanted to just, you know, switch between different patterns here, you could just say. So each key could have its own pattern. So there's lots of great guitar and bass stuff that's currently available. Okay. So it says, let me just hang on. My son's knocking. All right, new movie time for my son. The one I picked didn't have any kids, so I'll be right back. Bear with me. Sorry. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Says the question you probably can't say, but will Backbone or a version of it be included in version 11? I haven't heard of any plans for that. Obviously, Backbone is, you know, just a brand new instrument sound design tool, so I'm not sure if it would come out as an instrument and then be rolled into version 11. So I think it's a pretty amazing tool, especially if you watch kind of, you know, how Robert Dudzik worked with it and stuff like that. So it's a pretty amazing sound design tool. Question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to automatically color a track when moving it into a folder to the same color as the folder that is? I don't think so, but I'll give it a try and see. So let's say. See if there's some project logical editor thing. Yeah, I don't know a way we could do it through the project logical editor, but I'll play around with it and I'll kind of pass that along as a suggestion. Maybe holding down a modifier key would colorize it the same. Okay, question. Is there a way to set the default transpose mode to a new clip to be independent rather than follow? I don't think that there is a default way of doing that. So let me just drag a loop in and we'll take a look. Yeah, I don't know of a way to do that, but I'll see. I could play around with it a little more and see. But I've kind of asked in the past to maybe have a modifier key when you drag something in to put it in musical mode or not musical mode, and same with transposition. So I don't know a way to do it automatically. All right. Okay, so it says, hi from Saudi Arabia. I tried all the options inside render and play settings to render a MIDI track. Why result is always that the MIDI track becomes muted even if I select keep source tracks this unchanged. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So let's say if I have like this bass part here. Okay, and I wanted to just render that particular one. So let's come over here. Let's get to my render settings. So render to this and see if it gets muted or not. So mine didn't mute. So we'll do that again. So when I come here, I go to edit to render in place. So I have that event selected. I'll make it a little larger here so we could see it easier. So I'll have the event selected, go to render in place, go to render settings. I'll choose dry. And then I will just come right over here and say keep source events unchanged and render. And then both the source and the rendered track, or neither of them are muted. So maybe if you could just check, see if you had the latest version of what you have, but I haven't really run across that in other ones. But you could email me at clubcubase at steinberg.de. Okay. Okay, question, how to change the high-pass filter EQ channel strip, example 812, 18 dB, etc. So let's come over here to this audio track. Let's open up the channel settings. Let's get to the EQ. So if you just click directly to the right of the high-pass or high-cut, low-cut filter, here you can see 8 dB cut, or if you wanted to go up to 48 dB for your cuts, you could do that. So as soon as you kind of enable it, just click on the right-hand side. So I want 48 dB, and then you could just kind of cut like that. Okay, let's move on. And just see like discussion on, if you should tag the, Cubase for asking a question. You don't have to do that. It doesn't really kind of speed up the reading process for me. So you could just leave your question in the comments field. That'd be great. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. How do you set up external editors? So it works with some external editors. So if I wanted to take this into Cubase or into Wavelab rather, so if I just go to audio, one of the things, so it doesn't necessarily, so if when you come over here, it doesn't necessarily work with every, 2-track editor. But if I wanted to take this particular file and go to audio, I could at this point just say, edit in Wavelab, and that would launch this particular file in Wavelab. And there's special kind of two-way communication. So if I want to take this and let's just come over here and, do something, let's say remove DC offset, or I'll just reverse that. And now I click on that. When we play it back, that audio file will just be reversed. So we have two-way communication between Wavelab and Cubase. And if you have other editors kind of as more of a standard protocol, if you want to do ARA2, you could just come right over here to extensions, and then you'll see like if I wanted to now run this in spectral layers, we can now just open that up, and then spectral layers will just kind of show up in the bottom editor here. But it's not just set up to work with every single editor. So. Okay, just reading through comments. Okay, can meters be set to any other level than 6 dB and 12 dB in the project settings? I have a fader port 8 controller with 10 dB markings on the faders. When no endo is set to 12 dB, meters, the faders jump. Yeah, I've never heard of a control surface that chose 10 dB. That's really odd. It's usually 6 or 12. So those are the two settings that you could do, and I think it's going to be under your project settings, so it used to be 0 is horrible, and then 6 dB for metering, and then no one could work unless they had 12 dB in metering. So those are the two choices, and it kind of leads to a lot of different aspects where we don't necessarily want to have more. So I'd say it's pretty atypical to have a 10 dB setting on control surface for meters. So it's a little odd to me. Okay, let's move on. Okay, it says, I'm using a Mac Pro still in High Sierra. Noticed that Mojave Catalina only noted as supported Mac OS. Does 10.5 Pro run stable on 10.13 High Sierra at all? There's lots of people that seem to be running it fine on High Sierra. It may not be officially supported, because they go through, pretty exhaustive testing capabilities when they're doing the quality assurance tests. So sometimes, when you do that, it's just they don't want to necessarily spend, 2 weeks of time doing a, 2,000 test on an older operating system. So, but I think, and if you look at forums, you'll see that lots of people are still running it on, on previous operating systems without issues. So. Okay, so how about VST Connect with Cubase 10.5 elements, please? So let me just see. I think I have elements. I'll take a look at it here real quick. Just get this booted up. So if you have the VST Connect Pro, which I think is still on sale, you could use that with the Cubase elements. But with the lesser version, you don't necessarily get the free VST Connect SE with it, and it kind of makes sense. It is a much less expensive program, but we did have, there's recently a big TV show, one of the singing contests where they're able to do the whole show in Cubase elements with the VST Connect Pro. So with that, so as you get more expensive versions of the program, there's more features that are rolled in for, different licensing issues and different features that cost a lot. So that's why you may not see it in Cubase elements. But if you get the Cubase, if you get the VST Connect Pro, that'll work in elements as well. Okay, question. When playing a VST instrument like woodwind or brass, is there a way to make it sound more realistic by adding space for the player, by taking breath for realism? That's always a great thing to do. So if we add a track, let's say a quick instrument track, and we'll just run a Hallian Sonic SE. So I'll just pop over here. So let's say, if you wanted to be, so let's say if we're playing, if you never take a breath, it sounds unnatural, and composers just tended to shy away from doing that. So, the one technique that a lot of, just a simple technique is just to actually breathe as if you were playing the oboe or clarinet or trumpet or trombone. Just go and play along with your breath. So just go. Da, 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 da. And just kind of play it like that. But there's not necessarily a Cubase function to, simulate the breaths, but, just kind of as you are playing it in, breathe along, and there's very similar techniques. Like, I have a friend of mine, Rob Arbitier, is probably like the funkiest drummer in the world, but he does everything with his left hand, but he only playing it on a piano keyboard, but he's an amazing like MIDI drummer, can like out drum just about any drummer. But he's very conscious to only use 4 fingers because a drummer only has 4 limbs, so you kind of set up those conditions when you're trying to recreate it. But I mean, you could go into Cubase, and let's say if we recorded something, so with my oboe, And once you go into and start editing, here you could just choose to, I'll just hide this. And, you could just choose to kind of shorten the notes, but there's not like an automatic algorithm. But if you breathe along as you play it, that'll give you a pretty good indication of when you run out of breath. And it's those little things that can make a big difference in making stuff, a lot more realistic. Okay, so I just see for the generic editor question, I'm trying to use the Ignite Amps TPA1 to dial in specific resonance. Plugin only has knobs with no values. Noticed generic editor doesn't allow typing in value for any 3P plugin. Well, it's really when we see the generic editor for the plugin, what we tie into. So let's say if I'm here and there's, let's choose just like a guitar amp, so if I'm here, so this will only take advantage and only access the parameters of how the plugin is set up. So if the plugin doesn't have that, it's the generic remote can't bring that functionality to the plugin if the plugin doesn't have that functionality. So you may want to contact, the Ignite amps and see if they've thought of enhancing the plugin if that's the case. Okay. Okay, so we have people checking in that they're late. You don't have to worry about it. I won't give you a tardy slip. So, but makes me feel like a stodgy old teacher when people tell me they're late. So you don't have to worry about it. You can always rewatch it afterwards. Okay. Hi, 2 questions. 1, how can you easily mute waveforms on multiple tracks when in the arrangement window? And 2, is there a way to adjust volume quickly in the arrangement window? So, all right, I'll jump back to our project here. Okay, so if you use the mute tool, you can mute tracks or events. So if I just wanted to, click on the mute tool, which is the X, you could just kind of come here and quickly mute. And if you wanted to, you could have also clip gain. So if you wanted to select like all of your drums, I could just take that, and this is pre-fader. So if I want it, and just grab in the center, and then you could adjust the volume. Very easily. And or if you wanted to do just a section of that, you could just kind of select it and hit Shift X, and just for that one section. So grab the range tool, hit Shift X, then up or down. So there's some quick ways to, or if you wanted to just do that, hit Shift X and then mute. You can mute just a region as well. So there's some quick ways to mute multiple tracks. And if you have that going on for multiple tracks, let's say you're playing, and I wanted to mute all these, I could hit Shift X, or I could just take those. I'll hit Shift X this time. And now that those are kind of all selected, I could just kind of mute different regions like so. Okay. Okay, thanks for all the great questions from everyone. All right. Okay. Okay, so I'm just seeing other people mentioning that they're not having issues with their Kontakt. So probably I see a question: is this Pro AI or LE? I'm not sure if that's maybe with the Kontakt discussion. So, but I'm running Cubase Pro. It's probably pretty obvious, I guess. All right. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so just see another Grant. Good to see you on the Hangout. Asked to show some of the new updates. So we did that earlier in the Hangout. So I think it might have been like the second question. So maybe if you go to like minute 13, if you wanted to jump back. Okay, so question: how to separate MIDI drum loops into individual tracks using MT Drummer programs to make drum tracks. So if we have so let's say I've loaded up a drum set and I have just, let's say I drag a pattern to my project window and I have lots of different MIDI parts here all within. I'll look at this in my drum editor. So when we look at this, I could see kind of all my different drums. So if I wanted to split each of these drum sounds to their own track, all I'd have to do is I will select this event, go to my MIDI menu, and I will choose dissolve part, and we will choose to separate by pitches, and then hit OK. And now it will automatically split each of those, and we can see basically the different names show up here. So each sound is now automatically been mapped to different sounds to their own individual track. So just select it, go to MIDI, and then choose to dissolve part. Okay, so it says my sequence project is 55 BPM, but somehow tempo sounds wavering, not consistent. Is it possible to make tempo go to 110 BPM, but songs still play like normal? I hope to solve this wavering. So you could take any sequence and speed it up, but it doesn't sound like it's the tempo is the issue. So maybe, check to see if you have actually, played, like on the beat, so sometimes if you're not, you could have your performance. Let me just open up Cubase again here real quick. Sorry about that. So you could have Cubase, depending on how you sequence the parts with the beat, it could be maybe that they're just a little bit out of time. But I don't think that it's going to be actual, going to be like the issue is going to be the tempo. So let's say if I have a sequence project like this one, I think probably what you're going to find, if you say it's lagging, that doesn't seem like it's a tempo problem, but maybe stuff wasn't recorded to the click track. So, but let's say I'll take this example here, and we're at 132 BPM. So let's say if I make it 180, So what I think you're going to find if you say it's lagging is that as you start playing that, some of your different parts, um, are going to be kind of off of the grid as you go on. And I think that if you solve that, that would be the problem. And it could be quantizing. But I don't think that changing the tempo is going to really solve the issue for you. Okay, it says, question, Greg. I messed up a setting for recording. How do I set up a record option to record on first note played and not by clicking the record button to record, i.e. hands-free to play and record? So as soon as you actually go to record, we don't have a play by hitting first note. But if I'm here and let's say I have my piano selected, and let me just see if I have this configured quickly. Just bear with me a second. So, if I'm here on a track and I just recorded different MIDI data, all you'd have to do is you'll see this little function here, and that's a retrospective record. So anything that you just recorded in the buffer will automatically just be recorded. So try just hitting the retrospective record. And if that came in 10.5, but if you have earlier versions, just go to your transport to MIDI retrospective record, and then you could insert. So that way, because a lot of times it could be off if you set the first MIDI note to record. So that could kind of mess you up a bit. So, just kind of check that and just try doing a MIDI retrospective record. All right. So question, can you introduce me to Carlos so I can get a copy of his shared orchestral file, please? If you want to send me an email, I could do an email introduction. Yeah, Carlos is a wonderful guy. So great composer, engineer, producer, educator. So really, he works out of Richmond, Virginia. So just really wonderfully talented guy. So, but I'd be happy if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Be happy to kind of put you in touch with him. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so let's just go ahead. See, Grant missed some of the stuff because he's mowing the grass. That's going to be me tomorrow morning before it gets too hot. All right. Okay, so it says regarding direct offline processing, is there a part of the program that shows which tracks have DOP on them? I can't find it if there is. I don't think there is, but if you actually select, if you select the event and just hit F7, that will indicate if that track, you'll see kind of whatever direct offline processing has been applied to the selected track. But I can see where that can make sense, where some indication that like maybe in like a report or something that this has direct offline processing, or maybe even a little icon somewhere. That's a good suggestion. Okay, so it says, I need tips on tightening the frequency between instrument tracks so they can all be distinguished in the stereo track. Yeah, it's kind of the age-old dilemma of mixing in general, but, you'll find that a lot of times, some things that help, different people, like on vocals, make sure that, a lot of people will just kind of go to the EQ and just kind of roll off the low end on vocals. That could add a lot of unnecessary mud. So a lot of times, I see a lot of people just roll off low end on almost every track except for maybe bass and kick. And doing it also for reverbs returns. That could be very helpful. Hang on just one second. My son's at the door. So those are some things, and reason why a lot of great recordings sound good is not necessarily because of the recording, but the arrangement. So make sure, like you don't have the piano in the same frequency range as the bass, and the kick is separate. So try to think about arrangements as well, and that's a great tool to work with. So I'm gonna take a quick 2 minutes and get a new movie for my son since he didn't like the last one. So I'll be right back. Thank you. Sorry. Hang on. All right. Sorry about that. I'm back. All right. Okay. So let's move on. So question, is there a way to save a default preset for different track types so I can create a stereo track and automatically have an EQ and gain plugin placed on track? So every track has an EQ and gain already on it. But what you could do, a lot of people will start from a template, but you could also just as if you have a particular track, you could say I want to save it as a track preset, and then load a track preset, but it's not like a default setting. But a lot of times when people are doing that, they may just kind of start off with a template, or have track presets so that you could just say, you could say add track using track preset. So you could say, this is my default, and just boom. And you could go like that. So there's a couple of things that you could try, but there isn't like automatically turn on when I add an audio track that these settings are set. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so we have Chris from Allenberg in Germany. Good to have you on Hangout. Okay. Okay, so it's a question. So when I sequence a track and I try to, for example, import and audio recorded from YouTube or whatever, I do the tempo detection to stretch the audio, but it messes with the whole project. Help. So if you've imported, okay, so when you import, let's jump to a project here really quick. I think. I've seen a lot of people will take, if they have like the audio that's been imported along with the video file, and you do a tempo detection of that. Make sure that when you, let me see if I could find this particular audio file again here. So go to my pool window. But I think what you want to do is make sure that the track I'll just go ahead and remove this track quickly. I'll see if it's still in my pool window. But when you import the video file itself and you do a tempo detection, make sure that, let me just see if I can find this video quickly. To new project. So if you've done a tempo detection of this file, so let's say we're playing our video along with this. So
Hamburg prides itself on its cosmopolitan society.
So let's say if I do a tempo detection of that file. And the video kind of is changing a lot. So let's say if I just kind of come here.
Thriving young adult community with many beautiful spots to enjoy urban life.
So what you want to do is to make sure that this particular track is not in musical mode. So if we come over here, we want to place this into time linear mode. So it looks like a clock. And then as you bring in different audio files, it will match the tempo of this, and this isn't going to kind of change to adhere to the new tempo. So since this is kind of the foundation for the tempo, that's what you want to use. So try putting that into linear mode. And I think that will help you with that. Okay, so sorry for hitting my mic. So question, I would like to create a template from my latest mix. What's the quickest way to strip all the settings like EQ moves and automation, etc.? So what I would do if you wanted to do that, let's say I have a template. I wanted to import tracks from a project. So close out the project. You can come over here and say, okay, I wanted to take this. So select a project. And this is in 10.5. You could choose to not import events. I'm going to select all the tracks. I'm going to choose to not import the events and parts. I want to import the channel and inspector settings, but not the automation, and then hit OK. And you can now have everything without the automation and without the events. So just go to import tracks from project and select the project, and then just uncheck events and parts because you probably don't want the audio files to be carried over if you're going to use it as a template, and uncheck automation. Okay. Okay, good to see you on the Hangout, Danny. Sorry I missed your call earlier. Danny's a wonderful musician. It's the keyboard player with Government Mule. Great to have you on the Hangout. Okay, so, and again, if you've learned something new, feel free to go ahead and, to give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hey, Greg, greetings from North Lincolnshire, England. I wonder if the right-click UI will make a return. I was so used to using right-click and going straight to the tools at the top of the menu. I'm the same way, so I've expressed my feelings on that as well. So, but it always helps to have someone else who, so I appreciate asking for it. So I kind of miss it a bit as well. So my timeline jumped. So let me just. Okay. But I know it's been, I've been in discussions over it still. So about the right click functionality changing from 9.5. Hi, Greg. Tez from UK. Is it possible to create a control panel that is integrated with an external instrument? I have a Novation Drum Station V2 that I want to control. Yeah, so you could definitely do this. And this is kind of, if we go into the program, if you go to your studio and go to your MIDI device manager, under more options, and go to your MIDI device manager, you could install your device. We could define a new one, what channels you want to use. I'll move my mic stand here. If you want to have, different SysX types, snapshots, aftertouch, pitch bend, so you could have all these for your different channels. So let's say you want to do that. And then you could just open your device and start making, You can make it like a general size or for the inspector or channel strip size. So now you could just make it a general size. Come over here, add different panel types, drag it in. You could import bitmaps. You could also just kind of choose to edit different panels so that they'll do different MIDI messages, sysx, or whatever you want it to do. So, but yeah, you could definitely kind of make your own editors. It's not for the faint at heart, but it's kind of a really tweaky MIDI thing that you can make incredibly powerful tools to access particular functions that you want. Okay, it says I've exported a song that we're in 60 BPM, exported with ASIO for all from another DAW and imported into Cubase, and it said tempo is 56 to 57. Can the tempo be affected when exporting from Cubase also? Usually, if you notice that, you may notice that the tempo is slightly changed and the pitch, if it's slightly changed, it could be a sample rate mismatch. So maybe you exported at 48K and imported it at 44.1 or something like that. So check to make sure that there isn't a sample rate mismatch. Okay, so question, Greg. Hardware does not show always an input channel. At times, it's completely disappears. So I'm just which hardware? So let's say. So I think this is with maybe going back to the MR816. So if you don't see the hardware on the input channel, it's probably not actually defined here. So if you add a bus, you could just make sure that you have, if you don't see the hardware settings for an input channel, that means probably that the input channel does not have a currently active input defined from the MR816. Once you have the input port defined, then the hardware will show up. So unless if you have like 7 inputs and you don't have an input defined, the hardware won't show up until it's physically connected. It's physically defined as an input in the VST connections under the inputs tab. So once you define the input, then the hardware settings should show up. Okay. Okay, what bit and sample rate do you recommend? Say on a modest project with 10 audio tracks on MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM. I have an MR816 and UR22. I think 2496 is fine for, depending on the material. I still do a lot of 24-bit, 44.1. And I found, if I'm doing sound design stuff, where you have to do like extreme pitch shifting, then I may record at higher sample rates. But as a rule of thumb, I found out if your audio doesn't sound good, it's usually not the sample rate's fault. So 24-bit, 44.1 or 48K, then you should be good and have a lot of different projects, a lot of different capabilities, especially for 10 to 12 tracks. Okay, so just see a comment. I agree, Greg. I also loved my MR816. It's a great shame that Steinberg decided to kill it for us Mac users, though. Well, there's also a lot of stuff with, you could also blame Apple for changing the whole operating system for it not to be compatible. So, kind of goes both ways, but, the interface is at this point 12 years old. So, and it's, it still works. So, it's hard to justify development resources on a 12-year-old interface. I think Yamaha and Steinberg do a good job of still maintaining older hardware, but, at a certain point, it's hard to justify a return on investment spending a lot of time where, on a Windows platform, it still works because Microsoft's generally been a little bit better for drivers, continuity between operating systems. So I say question, is there a video on markers and sequencer organization stuff? I know that in my Q&A series, I did a pretty extensive video on markers. So if you search on the Cubase YouTube channel where this video will go, you'll see that there's a lot, there's a pretty detailed video on markers you should learn a couple tips and tricks on. But we'll show you a couple things with markers that maybe a lot of people don't know. So, you know, if you wanted to drop markers in, you know, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. One is, you know, if you just hold down the Alt key or Option key and click with your cursor, or you could just use your pencil tool, you could drop your markers in. If you wanted to add a range, you could just select your range here and put in cycle markers as well, which are independent. You could have these markers be in tracks that are musical based or linear based. So if you wanted these markers to line up to a very specific visual cue in a video, and you change the tempo and you want the marker to be aligned to the video, you could set this to, you know, right here. You could say that's going to be in linear bass, and as we adjust the tempo, these markers would still be at the same SMPTE timecode position. Or you could have it based on musical bass. You could have multiple marker tracks, so you could have up to 10 different marker tracks. So if you wanted to add additional marker tracks, you could come here and you could, you know, you could go to your marker window here and you could just have access to all of your different marker tracks here. So if you wanted to see your markers here, we could also just add descriptions. So let's say I go to marker 01. So at this point, if you want to put in like, you know, verse, chorus, you could do labeling of the marker names. And if we have cycle markers set up, and you could also colorize your markers. So if you want cycle markers to be, I think we may be able to color those independently. So if you wanted cycle markers to be yellow, other markers to be green, or other colors, you could do that. If you wanted to, let's say if you're, you know, we had a question a couple weeks ago, someone wanting to do like a song and they kind of likened it to Dark Side of the Moon, where all the songs kind of blend in, but they needed to export separate files. When you go to do an export audio mix down, you could choose to export based on the cycle marker as well. So you could have one project where like maybe a live concert and say, I just wanted to export each song of a long linear recording. So you could make those into cycle markers and then export those as separate pieces of audio simultaneously. So it's a couple things you could do with marker tracks. All right. I know we had people that sent questions in. So I'll get to that before we wrap up. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. If you've learned something new, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. So question, I wonder if there's any way to move stereo out in the mixing console so it's always on the full right side of the screen. In Elements version, I had it on the right side always, and now I upgraded to Pro and it's not on the right side. So how we could do that, if you always want to have a track that's anchored, let's say my master fader, I always want it to be anchored there. We could do this a couple different ways. One is you could just go to visibility and then click on zones. So click on visibility at the top and then go to zones, and you'll see 3 dots. So when I'll go to my input output channel. So if I wanted my my master fader to always be on the left hand side, it'll now be fixed to the left hand side, or it could be within the middle zone. But if you always want on the right, just click there, and now regardless of where you scroll, your master fader will always be visible. Okay, so we had a question. And this kind of asked in a previous hangout. I kind of had a brain cramp, I think, when going over it. Is someone had two different tracks, two different audio events on different tracks, and they wanted to crossfade between the two events. So if we wanted to take these two events while on different tracks and have them fade in and fade out. So like someone asked how to do that. So I'm going to use my range selection tool and just select like this range here. And then I'm going to hit the letter A. And A is adjust fades to range. So now that I hit A, and I'll just make this larger so we could all see it a little easier. So now that I've hit A, we could see that where I had the range selected. So if I come here, select those two events again, and then hit the letter A, that will fade out this region. And then the next event on the next track, that will fade it in. So even if you wanted to just say, I wanted to fade in this event to there, you could just hit A, and that will automatically just do the clip gain fade just that easily. Okay, we had a question. I would like to know if it's possible in Cubase to translate Avid S1 Yukon controller fader data to assignable MIDI CC automation data for orchestral sample library track recording. And secondly, how easy it is to transition back to Yukon for mixing activities. So Yukon doesn't support MIDI CC messages. So it's kind of a protocol that we can't really change what Yukon is transmitting. So unfortunately, like the Avid S1 is just it's not a good solution for like a MIDI like CC fader control surface. So maybe Avid will change it, but I think a lot of the guys that developed Yukon aren't with the company anymore. So I'm not sure if you'll see that actually happen. And it's pretty common in a lot of audio control surfaces that they leave out doing MIDI CCs, which is pretty basic. But you should contact Avid with that because the box doesn't do it. So we can't really turn what they do into another message, even though it seems like it should be easy, but it's just kind of using that protocol. Okay, why when creating a rack instrument, Cubase automatically creates a folder with inside the instrument itself? Can you explain the reason behind this? So I'll come over here. Let's add an instrument rack. So I'll just do this from scratch. So we'll just add like a Padshop. Okay, so what we see here is going to be kind of the so we've told it to do a MIDI track. So we see this, and we see these in a folder because this will be even though we see this kind of listed here, this is really just the automation track. So of what you see, and this, when we look at this, this will be like the MIDI track itself, I believe. So once we come here, okay, so we have that as our master volume. So this will be our MIDI track that we've created, and then these will just be kind of the MIDI volume, I believe, and the automation volume. So they're just the MIDI volume, like a MIDI CC volume, as well as the audio characteristics for the VST instrument. So people will use a combination of MIDI CC and automation for their MIDI tracks, and that's kind of why you have those. But it's kind of placed in a folder to kind of tuck it away as well. Okay, so we've gone through some of the questions already that were mailed in advance. Okay, and Millard had sent kind of a comment about wanting to be able to, about the channel configuration views. They're kind of saved per at the project level, which can make sense, but he wants it to also be saved independently of the project. So I'll pass that along. Thanks for the comment, Millard. So, question, you've mentioned on a few occasions that you use a keyboard sustain pedal to switch your talkback on and off. That sounds like a great idea. I have an AXR for you. Would you and would like to know how you have that routed and connected. Photos may be helpful if you have them. So I have it in my personal studio. If I come over here, let's see if I have it on. I have it with my CC121 as a controller, and I have the foot switch. The CC121 has its own foot switch, and it actually has, so I just have it set to talk back on and off. Now, if you don't have a CC121, you could do it through a generic MIDI remote. So if we go to your studio, to studio setup, we'll add a generic MIDI remote by clicking on the plus sign and selecting generic remote. And I'm going to just come over here, and we think at the top as being our MIDI message. And I could learn this MIDI message. So I'm going to hit my sustain pedal here. I can see my input. And I want this sustain pedal, and we'll go to our VST control room. So we're taking this MIDI message, aligning it to this function. So we'll go to our VST control room, to device, to talkback. So now when I go to my control room and I hit my sustain pedal, it just turns on and off. So I'll just move this over here. So I hit the sustain pedal and it's turning my talkback on and off, on and off. So that's how you could do it. Okay, question. The media bay seems to randomly add locations like C, colon, or other paths that I never added. It seems messy and a bit unreliable this way. Even when you remove the check mark, it might add them back in later. And these would be system folders like documents, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, can we get a... So why it's doing that is it could be that some of the built-in content that comes with Cubase is going to be in like your documents folder. So at times, Cubase will, do that so that you could actually find like projects and, like all the, on all the content that comes with it, those tie-ins and projects are going to be there. So that's why it may be just kind of turning that on and off. And additionally, can we get a load into pool function and a right click to folder? So, if you wanted a project in the pool, to be referenced in the pool, and we can think of the pool as being files that have been referenced, that are referenced and being used in the project. So if you click on import, you could come over here to any of the files. Let's see if I have an audio file. So let's just say if I wanted to come here, you could just add a particular folder. You could import directly into the pool. So I think that makes sense. And let's see, and a function for right click, and a right click go to folder function. This could be handy if you browse specific folders more contextually from the huge list of files. So I think if we come here, let's see, I just wanted to see, you could see the path right here indicated. And I think if you, so you can see kind of the path of the file, but I could pass that along because that makes sense. Okay. So it says a friend of myself have logged a lot of hours working to get a system that allows third-party participation in the VST Connect Pro session, audio only for the third party. We've been employing Source Connect, reasonable high-res audio over the net, but with lowish latency. We've had it working beautifully, very briefly, with monitoring and talkback to and from all parties, but it keeps breaking. I suspect Source Connect plugin acts like a tap on the channels it is on. It's just not a Cubase Nuendo friendly. Is there anyone of yourself who's successful at creating a setup that allows a third-party client to participate in the session? Video is not necessary, but ability to monitor the session and verbally communicate with both engineer and performer. There are clients lined up for this. If it involves needing a lot of help, we could discuss the price or rate. I know that I think this is getting updated to work with the new VST Connect Pro, but there was this Studio Pass functionality that was intended for this. But I'll see if I could. I think this is from Paul Rucker. I'll see if I could figure out if that's going to be updated. And sometimes it's, and that would allow you to kind of do that via iPad. So I think it's being worked on for the latest version, but I'll see if I could actually get a confirmation of that. If you want to email me, Paul, I know you have my email address and our Facebook friend. So, okay, so let's go on. Okay, so I think we got through all the questions. Let's go back to our topics. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Okay, so I just see a comment from Ambient Dave. Hi, Greg, using a PC and Kukos Restream VST plugin to get Cubase into OBS Studio. Bit of setting up, but no issues, working great. Been able to capture audio from Cubase and screen recording, so that's good. I've know people have that set up as well. I've heard some good things about that. Okay. Okay, is there ability to import SF2 into Groove Agent instead of drag and drop waves into all pads? I think if you just so I guess I don't know a way of doing sound fonts directly onto let me just instead of just drag and drop waves onto all pads. So there hasn't been probably a lot of development. I could be ignorant of this, but with I think SF2 is going to be the sound fonts. So I think it's not sure if that's being as proactively worked on. So, but I'll pass on the comment as well. Okay. Okay, it says I've set all my preferences for metronome, but can't hear it. Is it something to do with the control panel? Sometimes what happens if you're running the control room, make sure that your metronome is turned on right here in the control room. So sometimes people accidentally, inadvertently turn off the metronome in the control room there, and then wonder why it doesn't work. And I can't hear it and drives me crazy. Okay, it says I use a Yamaha PSR 3000 as an external rack and program a microtonal scale on PSR. When I play note from MIDI track, PSR doesn't alter note pitches. However, if it's sent from VSTI track, it works. Why? Okay, so you programmed a microtonal scale on a PSR. When I So it says when you play a note from a MIDI track, PSR doesn't alter note pitches. However, if I send it from a VSTI track, it works. Why? I'm not sure what it would be the difference, because it's basically just sending it as a MIDI information, unless it's if you use it as a VSTI, it's just really a MIDI track that's bringing it back in. So I'm not sure. Maybe if it's an internal setting, but I could check with some of my colleagues on the Yamaha side. Okay. Okay, question. Does anybody know how I can sync an old Alesis HD24 via ADAT with Cubase. I believe that had ADAT sync on it for the transport. So if you have an audio interface, and it may be an older interface because ADAT sync obviously isn't as popular, but if you have an ARMI interface, most of those had an ADAT sync port, which is just a 9-pin connection. Some of the original Motu 2408s also had ADAT sync, so you'd probably need to just do the sync, define the sync for that. A lot of times people, why you did sync was because you may have had one interface that had one ADAT port and you do 8 tracks at a time, and synchronization was important. But if you have an audio interface that has 24 ins and outs, you could definitely just, do those 24 ins and outs in one pass and not have to worry about sync. But check out, some of the older ARMI interfaces, some of the older Motu interfaces, I think Frontier Design had some, but if you find an older interface with ADAT sync, then Cubase will support it, and you would just kind of go into your studio setup, and I think you would see the clock source, and you could just choose like ASIO positioning protocol, and then that would allow you to sync to your ADAT. Okay. Okay, can I have different time signatures on same project? Example, 4/4 for first 24 bars and 7/8 for next. Yeah, all you have to do is you could right click, add a signature track, and say I'm 4/4 here. Grab your pencil tool, and just at this point, at measure 25, I want it to be 7/8. And then 4/4, and then let's say, 6/8, whatever you want to do. And then make sure that you have the signature track enabled, the metronome set up, and then that's how you have your different time signatures. Okay, it says Cubase not showing additional content for loops. Tried Library Manager and reinstalling. So let me just look this up really quick. Bear with me just for a second. I'll see if I can find real quick the files that you will probably need to delete. Just had to reference it in a note on my other laptop. So if you have purchased additional, okay, so if you go, you're going to see in your preferences, there will be a MediaBay 3.db and a media offline 3.db file. And you could just search for where your preferences are. So once again, MediaBay 3.db and media offline 3.db. And if you search for those files, you should be all set for that. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Okay. Okay, question. I only have 2 outputs on my UR22C. Can I set up Q mixes and then just for me to hear instead of soloing the channels all the time? You can, but so you could do that. and just, you don't have to have it physically connected. Like if you just have the headphone out, and then you could just switch between your different cue mixes in your control room. So, and you may have to. So I think that'll work for you. So you just switch between that, and if you're using just the just the headphone outs on your UR22, you should be able to do that. So. Okay, so I see a question from Millard. What does direct routing summing mode actually do? Why would I use it or not? So by default, when we're in the mix console, and let me just add a number of, switch to a different project here real quick. So if we had a number of audio tracks, let me just I'll activate this project. Sorry about that. And let's add a number of group channels. Okay, so now when I come to my routing with direct summing mode on or off, so it will default to being disabled, but when I go to my direct summing mode, now I could take these tracks, activate it, and so right now it's only can be routed to one of the groups. So let's just take a number of these and let's route it to group 2 and to group 3, and let's say group 4. So with that bypassed, I can only send like these tracks to one additional routing destination. But with it enabled, I could say I wanted to go to multiple destinations at the same time. And that's what the summing mode does. So it allows you to basically send it to multiple destinations quite easily. All right. So one other question that we had mailed in was about an audio track following, like a bass line following a chord track. So let's say if I come here and someone was wondering how to get that set up. So if we so say we have a pretty basic bass line and we want this to follow the chord track. So if I have a chord track, I could tell this to just do root notes because it's a bass part. So I'll do that and we'll say I'll choose to follow directly. So now let's say I want to first go into Very Audio and have it do its own pitch analysis. So here we can see it's going to be like D and A. So I could double click here and say, okay, I want it to be in D. The next chord at this point, I want it to be in E. And let's do a C chord. And then let's go back to D. And you can see that as we do this, it's changing the audio, the Very Audio information. So that way you could actually take a real recording of like a real monophonic instrument like bass and have it automatically follow the different chord tracks that have been defined. So question, I plan to purchase Cubase very soon, but I was wondering how effective Padshop 2 will be for creating cinematic music. As I'm a film composer, Padshop 2 is like an amazing tool for that. And I think I have some of the, and there's amazing resources for this. Check out Gary Gibbons has done this Stay Home edition. Like this, and I think his content just wonderful. And he actually did a whole free bank. And if you haven't done it, go to the online music foundry and download this because it's pretty amazing for what you could do with it. So let's just say I'll just go through a couple of the presets. I mean, let me just go through some of these. But it's really good at sounds that constantly evolve over time. Stuff where you just kind of play one chord and it could write a whole cue for you. You know, it's just like these beautiful atmospheric. So it's just really just a wonderful. My son loves this. And I'm a terrible keyboard player, so I'm not doing it justice. But yeah, Padshop is a wonderful tool for film composers. Okay, let's just move on. Okay. Okay, thanks for all the great questions. Okay, just going through. Okay, lots of people helping out other people with questions. That's always wonderful. Okay, so just see question. When using an instrument track and activate the multi-outs, the inspector volume changes all the individual outs on that VST. Is that normal? I believe so, yeah. So, all right, go through a couple more questions and see. We'll wrap up in a couple minutes. I think if I go beyond 4 hours, then the closed captions don't work. Okay. Okay, so what are the supported controllers for the remote control editor? So let's go ahead and take a look at it. may have a brain cramp how to jump there real quick. Let me just. I'm just having a brain cramp how to get there, but I think it's gonna be designed for Yukon. I know it's Nuage. But I can't remember. I was just in it the other day, but I'm just having a brain cramp. So if you want to email me, I could do it on the next hangout. Okay. Yeah. So Mackie control is already kind of covered in there. Okay, we'll just go through stuff here. Okay. Just saying comment, Greg, time to switch to another movie. I just want one that YouTube won't flag me for using, so. Okay, so I just see, is there Cubase support for the Machine Micro Mark III, maybe a template for the MIDI? I think, it just works as a MIDI controller, so I'm not sure if a template's really necessary. Okay. Okay, so hi Greg, can you show how is it that Groove Agent MIDI out in Groove Agent 5 is not there? So let's take a look at it. Okay, so we're saying in SE or version 5. Okay, so you may not see it in the plugin itself, but as soon as let's say I hit play, then when I go to the MIDI inputs, we'll see the Steinberg Groove Agent SE. And now I'll just solo this and hit record. And now as we stop, we'll just see that has recorded all the MIDI data directly from Groove Agent. So you may not see it as an output, but when you go to input, then it'll become visible. Okay. Excuse me. So it says, say you have two audio tracks, A and B, and I would like to have track A to be plus or 20 loudness units from bar 3 to 7. How can I do that? So let's say I want to just do a normalize. So if I wanted to take just a region of it, I'll take that, go to audio, and we could go to processes, and we could choose to normalize. And I will just set this to, let's say, -20. So you could do it in dB or loudness units. And now as soon as we've done that, that has just taken that track and done it from within the range to whatever loudness unit value that you'd set in there. Okay, question, how can I set the console up for surround panning? What you need is go to your audio connections, and in your outputs, make sure that you have a 5.1 output defined. You want to select all the tracks in your project. So let's say if I come here, and I will just set the output to all these. Let's just do like the audio tracks here. And we'll set the output of all these tracks to our 5.1 output. And I can do this just by holding down Alt or Option plus Shift. So now when we go into our mix console, at this point, for all those channels that are bust out to a 5.1 out, we now have your 5.1 panner. I see comments, someone sample Greg singing now. Please don't. All right. Okay. Okay, just going through. See, there's one last question before we wrap up. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. When setting up, this is from Danny. Good to see you on a Hangout. When recording a new film cue at new tempo on the tempo track, is it possible to set up a pre-count at the new tempo without turning off tempo track and using master tempo control? So let's take a quick look. Just move this quickly. So I think if we want to go to the metronome setup, all right, let me see if I could set this, create this real quick. Let's do a new project. Okay, so let's say if I'm at measure 49, so let's listen to that tempo. So let's say we have a much slower tempo. Let's make that just more extreme. Okay, and see if I have that set. right, so let me just. So say if I just do the count in here. So once I activated count in, it did that. I'm just going to reread the question one more time. So it said we said at a new tempo on the tempo track, is it possible to set up a pre-count at the new tempo without turning off the tempo track and using master tempo? So I think if Danny, if you just set this for that particular point, and then just activate the count in, that now when you hit record, it's at the new tempo. The way you hear the count in. So let me know if that's what you intended, Danny. And thanks for coming on and hang out. Well, we've gone almost 4 hours, so 3 hours and 56 minutes. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick or two. I'm going to end it before the 4 hour mark, or YouTube won't do the automatic closed captioning on a video, and that helps out for a lot of international people so that it could be translated to different languages. So I will go ahead and wrap up. We'll be doing another hangout probably next Tuesday. I think it's June 2nd, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. If you want to email questions in advance, please go to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. So you could send questions in advance. It's always wonderful to see people from all over the world. I hope that, if you've learned a tip or trick, please feel free to click on the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel and you get notified of other videos and future hangouts. But I really appreciate everyone taking their time and hope it was helpful. And please, everyone, stay safe and healthy. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.